The Swedish government, now let's move to Sweden, where the Swedish government, fantastic news, they basically threw out all the mad greenies, and you now have the Swedish government saying we're going to go back to nuclear, we're going to go back to coal, we're getting rid of net zero. They're completely overturning everything to do with the net zero climate.
But it's not just
because they're going, and they know in Sweden how cold it can get in winter, and they know in Sweden that you got to have your heating, and you got to have your eating, and you got to have your cooking.
But so the reason why the government changed in Sweden, though, it's important to note, is because the crime issue got so out of control, and a lot of that was tied to their very generous open borders policy, shall we say. Everybody got sick of the fact that there were bombings and shootings and grenades being thrown around the capital and the suburbs at all hours, that they weren't allowed to talk about it, just like with COVID. But, you know, next door in Finland, the Greens party there has said nuclear is perfectly fine. So we have here in Australia a Labour Party that is on energy to the left of the Finnish Greens and Greta Thunberg. Think about that.
But Sweden, as left and as green as it has been in recent years, had an enormous reliance on nuclear through all that time. So it wasn't like they were anti-nuclear and just completely sabotaging their own energy security. But now, with a centre-right coalition, I tell you, Italy didn't surprise me. A lot of these changes in government hasn't surprised me, but Sweden did. I've got a lot of family in Sweden. I've been there a number of times, and my God, it has been a far-left utopia for a long time. But you can only deny reality for so long. And when these policies are in full effect and people's living standards are being impacted, you've got crime, particularly in a country that had a very low crime rate for a long time and now has this explosion of violent crime. And you speak to people, and that people who would have never, ever thought about voting for the centre-right options are now saying, I'm backing them.
Yeah, and this is what happens.
Change.
And yet in Australia, we refuse to pay any attention. We refuse to learn. UK citizens, according to a report in The Australian this week, are going to, they can't keep warm. There's no surprises there. I've lived in England. It's bloody freezing at the best of times during winter, and if you don't have full heating all winter round, 24 hours a day, you are in real strife in that country, and they are going to struggle. Yet, of course, we had Volkswagen protesters at a factory.
I love this.
This is a great story. They went in, they glued themselves to the factory floor of the VW plant there to protest, climate change. And the people running the factory said, that's great, they can stay. Let's switch the lights off, let's switch the heating off, leave them to it. And
how good is that?
No urinals. Did I say that word?
I don't want to say that word on a Sunday morning.
You won't be having a bowl that we're going to provide for you to...
No bedpans.
No, sorry.
But it's so funny because it's like finally...
They're living the dream. They're living the
But you know what, Rowan, as with the netball situation in Gina Reinhardt, finally we're seeing actions, and stupid actions have consequences. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and you can stay stuck all night to the floor of an auto dealership without a literal pot to you-know-what in. But it's so funny because, why is it we have all these double standards for protesters? You can throw a can of soup on a Van Gogh and you're a hero, but if you pray within 100 feet of an abortion clinic, you're condemned.
The FBI will raid your house.
The FBI will raid your house. It's insane.
Well, it gets worse. The mob who threw the can of soup on the painting, Just Stop Oil, they are called. They now actually genuinely do have blood on their hands. A woman died because of these protesters. There was a car crash. They blocked the tunnel or whatever it was, and she couldn't get through and died. This happened before in Britain with Extinction Rebellion. These protests, they're funny, we laugh at them, but people actually die.
And I can tell you, if it was, say, an anti-lockdown protest that led to an ambulance not being able to get to where it wanted, for example, or someone being able to get medical, there'd probably be talk about charges and, is this domestic terrorism? And it'll be all sorts of repercussions. But these crazy climate activists get a free pass.
And why is it that, when with the lockdown protests, like in Canada and stuff like that, they seized bank accounts, they seized vehicles, they had people's insurance shut down, they depersoned them from society, and yet when you shut down a city for your Just Stop Oil protest or whatever, you're treated as a hero. This shows you who's in charge, and it ain't pretty.
Exactly.
No.